personality, a leader in providing humanitarian relief. I think that is a subject in itself during the Bengal famine, and an ardent espouser of our culture and traditions. And Professor Ghosh, I think many of those aspects of his character and contributions. But he was a fierce nationalist, one who was quintessentially Indian, who saw his nation and its prospects through that perspective. Now, what I would like to do today is to address those beliefs and activities of Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee that were so critical to the direction of the immediate post-independent India. As we all know, there were some particular causes to which he dedicated his politics and ultimately gave his life. They're crucial for a number of reasons. To begin with, these issues became the basis for a cohesive and alternative way of thinking in this country. These expressions of nationalism drove a debate for many decades about the nature of politics, the nature of our governance. They also influenced our thinking about development and progress, including on how best we can stand on our own. And of course, they shaped our approach to engaging the neighborhood particularly and the world at large. At one level, each of these may look like a different sector, a different domain, but the truth is that they represented a holistic worldview, and in real life, each was inseparable from the other. Now, with that as a larger context, allow me to focus on some specific issues that are so deeply, so inextricably associated with Dr. Mukherjee. The first pertains to the accession of Jammu and Kashmir and the ensuing debate about that process and its implications. Now, his position, of course, is known to all of us and also evoked of Ek Desh mein do vidhan, do pradhan, do nishan nahi chalenge. The issue itself does not require any further elucidation after so many years and so many experiences. We all know how damaging it has been economically, developmentally, socially, and in terms of national security when Jammu and Kashmir was not fully integrated into the national mainstream. When that was decisively rectified on 5 August 2019, obviously our national integration emerged that much stronger. But as a Minister of External Affairs, what I would like to underline today is how this issue was taken advantage of by external powers vis-à-vis India. Now, we must also appreciate that this assessment is not an outcome of hindsight. Even in 1953, Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee conveyed to Prime Minister Nehru that, and I quote him, "No one today could claim that your handling of the Kashmir problem has enhanced our international prestige or has won for us wide international support and sympathy. On the other hand, your policy in this behalf has added to complications both at home and abroad." I repeat, your policy in this behalf has added to complications both at home and abroad. Statesmanship requires that you should re-examine the whole matter dispassionately, and instead of being haunted by false internationalism, firmly create conditions for national solidarity based on fair adjustment of different views and input. I particularly stress this reference to complications abroad because that is precisely what came to preoccupy Indian diplomacy for the period thereafter. Interestingly, Sardar Patel too had a similar view when he very presciently cautioned Pandit Nehru about submitting our interest to the judgment of others. With the passage of time, the diplomatic consequences of the early misjudgments on Jammu and Kashmir have probably receded from public memory. It is possible that the younger generations are even unaware of the pressures that our country faced on this issue. But it is nevertheless worth recalling in order to fully appreciate the importance of what we did in August 2019. Question of how weaknesses are exploited in world politics and therefore why we should constantly strengthen our national security. Let me dwell on the global manipulation of the Jammu and Kashmir situation in some detail. This would explain what Dr. Mukherjee meant when he spoke of complications. Many of you would be familiar with the fact that in December 1947, India referred the matter to the United Nations under Article 35 of the UN Charter as a threat to international peace and security created by Pakistan's support to the invaders. There is a separate debate on whether this was the best pathway that India could have chosen at that time. But I won't get into that. Now, bear in mind that the British appointed Governor General accepted the instrument of accession in regard to Jammu and Kashmir under the relevant legal provisions. What I would like to highlight more is the responses of the major world powers to an opening that this situation provided. Clearly, as the recent colonial power, the United Kingdom was in the lead. It was also the one with the strongest post-partition agenda and therefore the most mischievous. The UK influenced the passing of a Security Council resolution calling on both India and Pakistan to refrain from any acts that would aggravate the situation. So what you have in effect is that the aggressor and the victim are put on par. Declassified records indicate very clearly that there was a strategy in the Commonwealth Relations Office to bring in Pakistani troops into Jammu and Kashmir to balance out India. The next step was to move through Belgium, which was then the president of the Security Council, to establish a three-nation commission on the matter. Now, in that process, India's main request that Pakistan refrain from assisting the invaders was conveniently dropped. The further sleight of hand happened when the title of the resolution itself was changed from to the India-Pakistan question. Canada then took over from Belgium and carried the Western agenda further forward by pressing for a Pakistani military presence in the place of the invaders if they withdrew. Matters, in fact, reached a stage where India actually had to threaten to leave the Commonwealth to protest against such bias. Now, as the stakes rose higher, the United States and other Western allies also got drawn deeper into this game. Intense pressures were exerted over the next few years, including the threat to withhold assistance of various kinds to India. The turning point, of course, was a 1957 UK-US joint draft by the Soviet Union. The next decade, India's defeat in the 1962 conflict with China saw a renewal of such efforts. The infamous Averell Harriman Duncan Sandys mission actually sought to arbitrate on Jammu and Kashmir, and this was the most serious of those endeavors. If they failed, it was less due to intent and more because of global circumstances and India's own resistance. The illegal 1963 China-Pakistan agreement on Shaksgam Valley made it awkward for Western nations to make common cause right then with Pakistan. But by 1965, Western partiality for Pakistan's attempt to capture Jammu and Kashmir was apparent once again in the stance that they took on the conflict. Issue moved purely to the bilateral format as a result of the Shimla Agreement. Attempts to interfere in Jammu and Kashmir nevertheless carried on. This happened publicly during the Clinton administration, and even the reaction of Western powers to our 1998 nuclear test tried to link it to this issue. I repeat, this happened publicly during the Clinton administration, and even the reaction of Western powers to our 1998 nuclear tests tried to link it to this issue. While the Bush administration moderated this, there were nevertheless conversations behind closed doors. Barack Obama did bring up Kashmir during his presidential campaign, and there was a debate actually about Ambassador Holbrooke's remit that some of you may remember. But much more than these diplomatic endeavors, what has hurt our interests more are the actual violation of our sovereignty and territorial integrity. And that violation was by China. As I noted, this began in 1963 and kept increasing thereafter through connectivity initiatives. We later saw that develop into the so-called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Each of these efforts has been countered and will continue to be countered. But keeping all this in mind, we must appreciate mainstreaming Jammu and Kashmir. We have not just strengthened national integrity, but also enhanced national security. And this is absolutely vital as India raises its profile on the global stage. Certainly, our Western partners today are much more understanding. But let that not obfuscate the fact that the real change has been in our own policies in respect of Jammu and Kashmir. A question closely related to the mishandling of the Jammu and Kashmir issue is that of India's misreading of Pakistan, its intent and its policies. This too is a long-standing issue and has cast its shadow over many decades on our well-being and security. And here too, there has been a decisive shift in Indian thinking after 2014. In the case of Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, the matter acquires particular salience because it was the cause of his resignation from the Union Cabinet. He shares his assessment candidly with the Parliament on 19th April 1950 in words that still resonate with all of us. And he says, I quote him, "I have never felt happy about our attitude towards Pakistan. It has been weak, halting, and inconsistent. Our goodness or inaction has been interpreted as weakness by Pakistan. It has made Pakistan more and more intransigent and made us suffer all the greater and even lowered us in the estimation of our own people. On every important occasion, we have remained on the defensive and failed to expose or counteract the designs of Pakistan aimed at us," unquote. Now ask yourself, this could well be the thoughts of the average Indian citizen in the aftermath of the 26/11 attacks in Mumbai. Indeed, if there are two figures of that era who displayed strategic clarity about Pakistan, Patel, and the other was Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee. Apart from the accession of Jammu and Kashmir and the treatment of minorities, about which I will speak, this was most notably on display where Dr. Mukherjee was concerned in regard to his own province of Bengal, and that is something, Professor Ghosh, which you pointed out. Once the concept of partitioning India was accepted by the Congress, Dr. Mukherjee put all his energies into ensuring that the metropolis of Kolkata and as much of Bengal as possible stayed with India. To that end, he convened a cross-section of what we would call influencers today, and led an agitation that compelled a positive outcome. Today, we cannot even contemplate the consequence of a different result. You can only imagine what it would have meant for the conduct of our foreign policy. It is therefore natural that this is regarded as one of his great contributions, certainly by nationalist opinion in our country. While there is a larger point that Dr. Mukherjee was making with reference to our approach to Pakistan, his specific analysis of the Nehru-Liaquat Pact is also relevant for policy responses towards Pakistan. Do remember that this pact was actually the precipitating factor for his resignation. There is much that he warned about the treatment of minorities, which unfortunately came true in the decades that passed. He underlined that the pact tries to ignore the basic implications of an intolerant state, that the declared positions of the Pakistani government undermined any sense of minority security, and that was giving life to these policies. But again, as foreign minister, it is his remarks on the India-Pakistan equation that I find to be of greatest interest and, I must say, of continued relevance. When it came to protection of minorities, Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee stressed that, and I quote him, "Today, there is a general impression that there has been failure both on the part of India and Pakistan to protect the minorities. The fact, however, is just the reverse of it. A hostile propaganda has also been carried on in some sections of the foreign press. This is a libel on India, and the truth must be made known to all those who desire to know it," unquote. Apparently, some things have not changed in some quarters, and I think you all know what I'm talking about. But let me finish this point. When it comes to the Nehru-Liaquat Pact, Dr. Mukherjee expresses reservations that actually predict much of what has gone wrong, not just on this matter, but on broader ties with Pakistan. He declares that, quote, "India and Pakistan are made to appear equally guilty, while Pakistan was clearly the aggressor," unquote. And he points out that when Pakistan violates agreements, there is no remedy open to India. In his view, again I quote him, "Any agreement with sanction will not offer any solution." So, in 2023, 7 decades after these insights on Pakistan, it is essential that we reflect on the judgments that Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee bequeathed to us. This is all the more so as the equivalence between India and Pakistan that was so troubling even in the initial years after independence morphed into a larger hyphenation. For decades, India and Pakistan were uttered in the same breath, and their differences made to look like a natural agenda left over from the partition. There were even periods when the military regime in our neighboring country was held out as an example of development. The 1971 outcome obviously changed much of this, but not as decisively as we would have hoped. Pakistan kept trying to create an artificial balance and was actively supported in that endeavor by both China and Western nations. This even went to the extent of assisting and facilitating its nuclear and missile programs. And worse still, Pakistan increasingly resorted to cross-border terrorism to bring India to the table. But if truth be told, our own policies were not sufficiently robust to firmly discourage this approach. Instead of confronting the cross-border nature of terrorism squarely, because it was emanating from Pakistan, We even briefly appeared to be open to a narrative that suggested that both India and Pakistan were victims of terrorism. This was exactly the false equivalence that Dr. Mukherjee had in his time. So what is the answer? We have seen that unfold over the last 9 years in a variety of ways. To begin with, this means taking a clear-cut position on the unacceptable of terrorism. It is obviously not in our national interest that we normalize terrorism by carrying on with the rest of the relationship as usual. That message has been sent loud and clear. Where egregious actions of cross-border terrorism are concerned, the operations at Uri and Balakot are as much a shift in our thinking as in our actions. But it is also important to mobilize the international community through advocacy and awareness creation. Only then can we be successful in delegitimizing terrorism. As a result of our persistent efforts, there is widespread understanding today that this is not a threat to India alone. That the UN Security Council's Counter-Terrorism Committee held a meeting at a 2611 site in Mumbai was a statement of no small significance. It is also our endeavor to get global platforms and conferences, whether we speak of the G20, which is we are in the middle of, or meetings like No Money for Terror, or bilateral and plurilateral mechanisms. And you saw that at the recent US visit or in the Quad statement, to keep the spotlight strongly on such threats. The listing process created by the UN Security Council 1267 sanctions, and there are no prizes for guessing which country features prominently in it. While matters related to Jammu and Kashmir and to Pakistan's behavior naturally come to mind, it would be doing injustice to Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee's legacy if we do not recognize fully his tenure as the nation's first Minister of Industry and Supply. In that capacity, he had a particular contribution to make to the establishment of the Chittaranjan Locomotive Factory and the Sindri Fertilizer Corporation. And he had a significant role in the transformation of the Hindustan Aeronautics Limited as we know it today. Here too, allow me to take a foreign policy perspective. In a competitive world where vulnerabilities are leveraged, it is essential that India builds deep strengths and modern capabilities. It is only then that we can adequately assure national security. While that may have been the broad objective over these 8 decades, it is also a fact that in the era of the open economy, this has led to great complacency on this front. We have struggled in particular to deal with competitors of greater scale and large subsidies. Our own policies, till a decade ago, have not been adequately supportive of promoting industry. In fact, there is apparently even a body of opinion that believes that we should not even be going in that direction. This has implications not just for employment creation, but even in terms of leading to dangerous dependencies. The Modi government has endeavored to course correct through a number of steps that include making it easier to do business, offering production-linked incentives, promoting exports, supporting small and medium enterprises, building the enabling infrastructure, and expanding the skills and talents of our society. These are all the building blocks of Atmanirbhar Bharat. And obviously, there are many more. The point I wish to stress is that the outlook that Dr. Mukherjee displayed as industry minister is today one which guides us as we prepare to ascend the global ladder. There is a significant set of international conversations taking place today about the need for reliable and resilient supply chains. In the digital domain, there are concerns about ensuring trust and transparency. When it comes to critical and emerging technologies, you will hear of the need for trusted collaboration. All these constitute opportunities for us to forge the right partnerships and ensure stronger national capabilities. Many of you, I'm sure, would have followed the Prime Minister's recent path-breaking visit to the United States and would appreciate the larger objectives that we sought to achieve during that visit. But to do that, we need leadership, vision, and belief, or undertake a Mars mission. This speaks for the level of confidence in the nation today. Commitment to our culture and history. But here again, permit me to take a foreign policy perspective. We have all seen a major economic rebound. The very G20, whose presidency we all celebrate collectively, is a reflection of how much economic capabilities have geographically dispersed since our independence. It has an accompanying political facet, again expressed through new mechanisms, platforms, and influences. We could talk of the Quad, or of the BRICS, or of the International Solar Alliance, or of the Voice of the Global South Summit. And indeed, it is visible in our own international standing, in our growing influence, and in the rising expectations that the world has of India. But if the world order is to really change, there has is today diluting, but it is equally important that the gaps are not filled just by others. This is all about entering the world of soft power and the importance of shaping narratives. And that can only happen when we are true to ourselves, to our identity, and to our traditions, which is why it is important that India should be Bharat. With Buddhist nations, especially some of our neighbors. He played a personal role in the return of holy relics from the United Kingdom and their display in Southeast Asia and Myanmar. It's like the Dharma Dhamma conferences, the restoration of the Ananda temple in Bagan in Myanmar, or the solarification of Buddhist sites in Sri Lanka, or the digitization of manuscripts in the Ganden monastery of Mongolia. Indeed, the importance we attach to our Buddhist heritage was only recently underlined when all the G20 development ministers visited Sarnath after the meeting. So, as we move in the Amrit Kal to build a new India, its building blocks must be sharply perceived. New India means closing vulnerabilities. It means responding to challenges. It means learning to compete. It means winning the mind games, and it means shaping the narratives. It means make in India. It means vocal for local, and it means Atmanirbhar Bharat. It means taking pride in being Indian. Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, through his thoughts, actions, and contributions, will always be a powerful inspiration in this regard. I thank you all for joining me today at an occasion where we all recognize this. Thank you.
হ্যালো অজস্র ধন্যবাদ আমাদের তরফ থেকে উনি এতটা সময় দিয়েছেন, এতটা আমরা আলোচনায় পার্টিসিপেট করেছি। আমি অনুরোধ করব স্বপনদার মাইক্রোফোনটা প্লিজ অন করে দেবেন।
The minister has very kindly agreed to accept a few questions.
স্বপনদা, প্রথমে একটা প্রশ্ন নিতে চাই। যাদবপুরের স্টুডেন্ট স্কলারও ওর প্রশ্ন রয়েছে অরূপের।
Thank you, ministers. My question is, when we are going to get back our Kashmir, which has been occupied by the Pakistan, we want to know it because we are from the land of Shyama Prasad Mukherjee ji. Thank you.
I think, since we are in the land of Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, the first thing to appreciate and to consistently get into the minds of the entire nation is the fact that we have actually rectified a fundamental mistake which was made in 1947. And a mistake for which Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee fought so hard in his own lifetime to rectify. Now, so to me, if you do not do that, see, I've tried to I mean, all of us know the domestic debates on this. The point I was making is, if you leave open such a vulnerability, in a competing world, others are going to exploit it. And that is exactly the account which I read out to you. And the fact is that by leaving there a Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, we allowed a contiguity to develop between really two adversarial nations. And that is today costing us as well. So now what happens beyond obviously is not something that anybody can say with great authority, and certainly not in public. But I do think that even in terms of making clear our, I mean, you begin first by at least opposing something. I mean, whether you then you act on it, that comes later. When we took a strong position against the Belt and Road Initiative, against the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, I can tell you there were sections in this country who questioned us, and many of them questioned us publicly. Today they may want to deny but the record is there for everybody to see that who was clear-cut about what were our rights and what were our interests, and who was once again dodgy as they have been for the last 75 years. So that's my answer.
Maybe I'll ask
Thank you.
a parallel question to this, use my prerogative. You're quite right in saying that the hyphenated relationship with Pakistan has been thrown into the dustbin. Pakistan is now stewing in its own juice, and it's no longer a priority as far as we are concerned. But the global priority as far as India and its neighbors are concerned is the other elephant in the room. Now that's something where a lot of our pretensions about soft power, hard power, non-alignment, independence sometimes seem to be put to the most severe test. I'm talking about the China factor.
Yes,
I know, but at least these days we mention China. There was a time in the previous government when the word China was not even mentioned. It was so embarrassing for them. They were not, well, whatever the reasons may have been. So I want you to sort of give us some perspective on how you see the relationship with China growing, especially in light of the developments in the Quad and the attempts to use India as the proverbial hedge.
Well, look, first of all, I would say in terms of what you said, soft power, how do we deal with it? I was reminded of something with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu actually said at the Raisina dialogue. I can't give you his exact words, but in effect it was that soft power is no use without hard power. Okay, so the bottom line really is that we have to develop that deep strengths. We have to develop those industrial capacities. We have to develop the technologies in order for us to it's not a question of competing with a neighbor or dealing with a threat. I mean, we need it for ourselves. India will not rise if India does not have the technology, the manufacturing, the economy, the infrastructure for that rise. So it's a self-propelled requirement that we need to have. And that is exactly, if you actually are to connect the dots, when Prime Minister speaks of a Atmanirbhar Bharat, when he speaks of an Amrit Kal, when he say that Bharat will be Viksit by 2047, these are all dots that he's connecting in his vision. And we can, Atmanirbhar Bharat is a kind of I would say a philosophy or an outlook or a statement of resolution about acquiring certain capacity. So I think first of all, we need to do it for our own sake. The second, in our own neighborhood, there will be countries where, again, for our own purposes, we will obviously like to have strong relationships and a kind of I would say a partnership that works for our mutual advantage. And in our own neighborhood, through neighborhood first policy, that is what we are trying to do. Now, if you go beyond, and you mentioned, for example, Quad. So if you take again Quad, what is Quad trying to do? Quad looks at a big space, the Indo-Pacific, and perceives that today there are big challenges out there. There are issues where many countries have common interests, and it is in our interest and frankly in our prerogative to work with other countries on this. We cannot give some other country a veto about who should be our friend and who should be our partner or not. Now, the fact, again, let's be honest about it, in 2007, we made an attempt actually first at creating a Quad, and then we backed off. And I think it was frankly very clear why we backed off. So today, even the Quad, when you speak of being independent, of standing up for your national interest, whenever you try to do something which is new, when you try to do something which is in our interest, which often means some other country in the world may not see it in their interest, we will come under pressure. There will be contestations, and that no country rises without tests. We have to pass test after test after test. That is what a rise of a country is about. And that is what Narendra Modi can make us do.
আমরা
We have a
আমাদের
question
মধ্যে
from Sri
হ্যাঁ আমরা আমাদের
Nishingo.
মধ্যে পেয়েছি বিশিষ্ট শিক্ষাবিদ ডক্টর নৃসিংহ প্রসাদ ভাদুড়ী মহাশয়কে, তার প্রশ্ন।
Sir Dr. Jaishankar, I'm a great fan of yours. I'm Dr. Nishingo Prasad Bhaduri, a beat of Mahabharata scholar, and have some smattering in ancient Indian politics, not modern politics. My question is, although I think this is not very contextual, still, my question is, amidst the time when Russia-Ukraine war is going on, and along with the economic crisis, which is going world. So my question is that we had, on many occasions, we have seen that we are with Russia. If not, it is an alliance, but Russia is our Sahaja Mitra, that is natural
Sure.
friend. Okay, but in this time, why was this bonhomie with Biden administration? Modi ji was there. That is one of my questions. Secondly, the emerging power is now China, at least in Southeast Asia. Can we not make a compatible working relation with China now at this time of a war going between Ukraine and Russia? I think you will answer my question, avoiding your master adage, neutrality and equal distance, because neutrality is an absurd word. Please.
First of all, I would rarely use the word neutrality. In fact, I cannot ever think of using it myself. So I will tell you why. Because I think we should not confuse independence of thought and independence of action with neutrality. I think when I look at any situation, for me, it would be as India, what is it, what are the benefits, what are the costs, what are the values, what are the interests, and I will take a call which suits me. And I think if it suits me, and I don't think it is being selfish, I think at the end of the day, international politics is about nations making that assessment and taking the calls. In a sense, you can say that is the rules of the game, and we need to play that game well. But let me come to that flow, as you said. First of all, about Russia. Our relations with Russia, if you note, have held very, very steady. Okay. They have held steady even though the world has gone through enormous turbulence in the last 75 years. So Russia, Soviet Union itself collapsed. There was a time when, in fact, the Russia which came out of the Soviet collapse in 92 was much more focused on Europe, but yet we kept the relationship steady. So, and if you look at, in fact, most other major relationships, Russia, Europe, Russia, China, China, America, all of them have had ups and downs. And I put it to you that of the major relationships in the last 75 years, India-Russia relationships are the steadiest. Okay, that is an empirical fact I put. And why is that so? One part of it is definitely there is a public sentiment in our country about Russia, and that sentiment derives from some of the events which I have referred to, including the support that they gave on the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. There were partnerships which were forged in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and those have their own momentum and relevance. But at the end of the day, there is a kind of a big geopolitical judgment that countries make, and definitely large countries make that judgment. For us, if you look at the Eurasian landmass, the big countries actually are Russia, China, and India. And for us, a lot of what we see in the Russia relationship is actually geopolitically driven. So I do feel it is a relationship which is insulated from in a sense, the ups and downs of regular politics, and has a certain ballast to it. Your next issue, which is on China. Can we have a understanding or some sort of modus vivendi, working relationship with China? Look, for India would, at this moment, what should be our priority? I don't think anybody in this room would dispute. Our priority should be how we improve the lives of our people. How is my growth stronger? How is it more inclusive? How do I create more jobs, develop deeper strengths, create the basis for the rise of India? When any big power is rising, that big power actually wants stability. Now, our problem is that the present downturn in our ties was not our creation. It was created by China. It was created by China violating two agreements of 1993 and 96 and moving forces to the line of actual control in violation of those agreements. Now, if we are to have a decent relationship, I think, they need to observe those agreements. They need to stop trying to unilaterally change the status quo. And they need to come to the understanding that, relationships between major countries work only when they are based on mutual interest and mutual sensitivity and mutual respect. They need to understand this. And my endeavor is to make them to understand this. So I can only say I'm working very hard at it. Certainly in the border areas, we have resolved some issues. There are issues we have not. I continue to do this. In diplomacy, you never give up. But as I said, it finally takes two hands to clap. And China too must have that belief in a workable relationship if that is to happen.
এবারে হর্ষ গুপ্তার প্রশ্ন নেব। হর্ষ গুপ্তা, অথর।
Very good evening, Honorable Minister, sir. My first question is on, we saw the diaspora very enthusiastically welcoming Prime Minister Modi, like they do in almost all his trips. But there is an element of perhaps emotionally divided or confused loyalties. Why don't we, as a confident rising India, think of dual citizenship, whereby we can exclude those with documented sympathy for secessionism or terrorism, but with friendly democracies, allowing them a greater psychological and economic stake in the rise of India. For example, Israel uses that very well with the US as one example. That's my first question, because recently the e-passports thing was a headline, and operationally voting is also easier, and they will not be allowed to join governments or run for parliament, etc. But they can be otherwise full dual citizens over and above OCI. Secondly, Russia, for example, had so much surplus based on our buying crude, but on those Vostro accounts, they could not really invest in India. They were uncomfortable. So in the long term or not so long term, we have to think of rupee as an international currency, not just for trade, but for finance. So what is the geo-financial or geo-economic thought you have on gradually liberalizing the capital account so that more people want to buy our debt, our money, our bonds in our currency? Thank you.
There was one part of the question, sir, which I omitted, which was you asked me, there is this bonhomie when Prime Minister went to US. Yes, of course, there was a bonhomie. You all saw it on your screens. Here again, I think we should all appreciate that for us, we should not be, it's not in our interest to be tied down to exclusive relationships. Because we have a tradition of strong ties with Russia, that should not become a burden or an obstacle to an equally strong relationship with the United States. Or those two should not, let us say, stop us from Japan or Europe or whoever else we are looking at. So I do not see our relationships as a kind of zero-sum game. On the contrary, my effort is to see if I can actually advance on multiple major relationships, regional relationships, all at the same time in the best possible fashion. Obviously, it's not easy. It requires a lot of nimbleness to do that. There are complications, but that is today I would say the hard challenge for Indian diplomacy, and one which we at least feel quite confident today tackling. And I think Prime Minister Modi has shown that if you look at it, there are today two big divides. Okay, there is an East-West divide because the West and Russia, to some extent China, and there's a North-South divide, the developed countries and the developing countries. Now, if you look at where we are positioned, and particularly if you look at the leadership which Prime Minister Modi has taken, he has tried to position us advantageously both vis-a-vis the East-West divide and the North-South divide. We are credible today as the voice of the global South. We are seen, in the East-West as an independent voice. We are also perceived as a very strong democratic power. So, our technology relevance is very important for the developed world. So how do you, in a sense, navigate a much more complex world with many more variables going in many directions? That is really how the rise of India can take place faster. Now, as for your question, one on the NRIs, look, I really today think that this concept of what you call dual loyalties or divided loyalties, we need, I'm not saying that it is completely not there, but I think the world in a way has moved on, that there are people who may not, I know there are a large number of people of Indian origin who may not be Indian passport holders, who wish our country very well. And if you look at the record of the last many decades, at times of crisis, these people have stood by us. Many of them sent money to India. Many of them, have raised their voices in their countries on behalf of the society from which they came. So I would say the whole approach to them should not be like me versus the world. So where are these people? Are they there? They crossed the Lakshman Rekha and gone forever. I think that kind of thinking is now behind us. To me, there is, in a globalized world, a globalized workplace, a globalized marketplace, a globalized society in a way, if I have a range of well-wishers, some of whom maybe are nationals, some of whom may be people of Indian origin, some of whom may be people of other origins, but who are deeply invested in India, they together form for me a large pool of support, and I would be smart in using them to the best of my ability. Now, your particular question, do we do dual nationality or not? Different countries have handled it differently, and each one of them is shaped by their history. If you look, you cited Israel. Israel has certain very specific carve-outs because they reflect, the nature of emigration to Israel and with the countries with whom Israel is particularly bonded. I'm not sure these are easily transposed really from one country to another. I know this is an ongoing debate. At this moment, I would say the landing place, which has been there for some time, is in the overseas citizenship of India. At the moment, I think that is a safe landing place. Now whether the debate moves on or not, we'll have to see. On the issue of, look, the Vastro account, etc., those are all, I would say, temporary happenings. I mean, at this moment, there was a new situation. There were outcomes from a new situation where, our settlement with Russia obviously has its own challenges. So I'm sure, and there are people working on it, believe me, who are trying to find solutions for it. So that in itself, to me, is not necessarily a trigger for anything else. But I would accept your larger point that as our economy becomes stronger, I would say the first step, in fact, first two steps to my mind. One, of course, is to see if we can have, trade settlements using rupees. That is something which is helpful to us. We are exploring it with some countries. I think you will see that take root. The second is when it comes to cashless payments. If you see, for example, the UPI, the Unified Payment Interface, we clearly have a strong interest in getting other countries to buy into it. I think it's a big step that Singapore has accepted it. My feedback is even in the few months, there's actually been a very large volume of flows into India using UPI. I know a number of other important economies are looking at it. Some of our neighbors have asked on how they should be linked to it. So this is a very, very, I would say, ambitious area we are moving in, and we have to move in it with a fair degree of deliberation.
হ্যালো
I think we'll make this the second last question because
ঠিক আমরা এক সেকেন্ড আমরা আমাদের মধ্যে পেয়েছি
please wait your turn.
আমরা আমাদের মধ্যে পেয়েছি প্রফেসর অনিন্দ জ্যোতি মজুমদার মহাশয়কে যাদবপুর বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ের ইন্টারন্যাশনাল রিলেশনশিপের অন্যতম মাননীয় অধ্যাপক, তার কাছ থেকে আমরা প্রশ্ন এক্সপেক্ট করছি।
Thank you, sir, for your enlightening presentation in a very matter-of-fact way. And I think you are the only foreign minister who has a fan club across India. I have many queries because I teach international relations, but I will just ask two. Since you were talking about Jammu and Kashmir at length, in fact, what is the attitude of the government of India towards United Nations military observation group for India and Pakistan? I think they are still very much here doing what I do not know. And there is another question that is, as you write and as you talk about various components of India's foreign policy, what are the very crucial components of the India way that you actually try to propagate? Thank you very much.
Maybe I can take one more question. I can take one more question.
One more question.
I'm sorry. I'm extremely sorry. Sir, I have two questions from a standpoint of a proud and aspirant citizen of modified India. Sir, the first question is that all of us know from a news report published in the front page of India Today that in 2018 during Beijing Olympics, INC, Indian National Congress, and Chinese Communist Party had a memorandum signed in Beijing. There's a lot of hullabaloo about it, but though ex-CJI Justice Bobde showed blissful ignorance about it. So is it within the process of Ministry of External Affairs or Government of India to get this document, this MOU disclosed before the public of India? And my second question, though not connected to it, is though Modi government has been extremely sympathetic and proactive in securing and protecting the right of minorities, Hindu and Buddhist and Christian minorities, Sikh minorities in our neighboring Islamic nations. But what the new India, the modified India can do to ensure their security and their dignity in the respective countries they are presently residing at, apart from giving them asylum in India?
স্বপনদা, এখানে মিডিয়ার অনেকে রয়েছেন, একটা প্রশ্ন না অ্যালাউ করলে খুব বিপদে পড়ে যাব।
Can I take this too, or should I? One more?
Would you want me to add? Yeah, okay, all right. Evening, sir. My question is that, all right, my name is Shogoto Mukherjee and I work with the Telegraph Online. Multiple Indian prime ministers have made trips to the US in the past.
Yes.
Starting from Mr. Nehru to Mrs. Gandhi, to Rajiv Gandhi, to Mr. Vajpayee, and even Dr. Manmohan Singh. What I wanted to know from you, sir, and you had been integral part of this trip of Prime Minister Modi, how would you differentiate this particular trip from all those trips in the past? What is new? What do we have in this trip?
Sure, my question. Can I? Yeah. Okay, I'll take another round after that, so please bear with me. Look, first of all, on this UNMOGIP, the UN mission, some things are a kind of a leftover, you could say a legacy inheritance from periods of history, and that period of history is what I spoke about. So our effort today is really to move on, to do the right things to ensure that our interests are protected, that what has been agreed to among even between India and Pakistan. After all, in Shimla, there was an agreement regarding the bilateral nature of the settlement of our issues. So we are moving in a certain directions. There will be legacy institutions or presence. We have to find ways, frankly, of dealing with them and carrying on in the path on which we are proceeding. So at the moment, yes, they have some kind of presence, but that's really about all that there is to it. You asked me about the India way. Look, I only put it this way. I mean, I would sum it up in a way as an answer which I gave to this gentleman, which is one, we have to understand it's a very competitive world. We have to be very clear-cut about our interests. In fact, I mean, that kind of to quote Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee's words, this kind of false internationalism which can delude us about, who are our friends and where are our dangers. All that happens if your understanding of the world is clouded by some kind of ideological belief. I think it's important to be very, very hard-headed about it. But at the end of the day, the world is moving in a direction where there will be multiple centers of power. There will be our range of interests will broaden. We need to keep, many relationships in play. We need to advance on all fronts. We need to secure our neighborhood. We need to move beyond our neighborhood to the extended neighborhood, the Gulf, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, and beyond. And most of all, for the next 25 years, we have to lay the foundation of what would be a global footprint for India. So if you see today, Prime Minister dealing with Pacific nations or, talking to African leaders or engaging countries in the Caribbean, he is thinking 25 years. This is a Prime Minister who is not thinking and planning for this term or for this decade. He actually has a sense of where India is going. And that sense of India today, no point having a dream and not actualizing it on the ground. We cannot achieve everything we want to in a year or 2 years or 3 years. But we must start. We must put in place the steps so that it goes bit by bit by bit. On the two questions you had, look, if somebody signs something somewhere, it's for them to come clean on it. It's not my responsibility. So you're asking, you should be directing your question somewhere else. With regard, look, to the issue of minorities, it's a tricky matter. It's a sensitive matter. But what we should do is actually to promote respect and understanding, and to a certain degree, if our own standing in the world is stronger, if people feel it is important to get along with India, I think it would also translate into how minorities, certainly those minorities which are connected with India, are treated. There's a natural correlation out there. It doesn't even have to be in our neighborhood. I would say, if you look even in developed countries, the stronger India is, people of Indian origin or Indians traveling abroad will be better treated. That is very self-evident. And you can see that. We have today, who would have imagined that actually a big Hindu temple would be coming up in the United Arab Emirates? And please tell me, if Narendra Modi was not the Prime Minister of India, do you think it would have happened? So it's something we need. Actually, we ourselves must take a kind of an approach of solving, or I would say ensuring a kind of a good solution, rather than take a confrontational view, because that can often backfire. On this question, what was different about this visit? Look, the first visit I was associated with, I didn't go there for that visit, was Mrs. Gandhi's visit to USA in 1982. The first visit where I was physically present in Washington was Rajiv Gandhi's visit in 1985. And if you look at all the visits that have happened thereafter, generally speaking, if people said, okay, what were the 3 big visits in our history? People would have said Narendra Modi's visit in 2014, the Madison Square Garden visit. They would have said the Dr. Manmohan Singh visit, where the nuclear deal would have been done. And probably they would have said Rajiv Gandhi's visit, because he tried really to smoothen out ties with the United States, which had been difficult in the period before. Now, I actually was there in Washington for each of these 3 visits. So with those 3 visits as a kind of benchmark, I can tell you for sure this visit was a completely different level. And there are many ways by which I can sort of demonstrate to you that, that it was a different level. Because, say, in diplomacy, one easy yardstick is protocol. This was only the 2nd state visit of an Indian Prime Minister. That the only other state visit which has ever happened before was Dr. Manmohan Singh in 2009. Secondly, this was the only time where a Prime Minister of India has addressed a joint session of the Congress twice. No other Prime Minister of India has ever done this. In fact, there are only 4 other people, 2 of them were Israelis. But other than that, I think only Nelson Mandela and Winston Churchill have addressed a joint session more than once. But it wasn't just this. We were, for example, in Washington for 3 days. On each of these days, the President of the United States was with the Prime Minister in a program. He was there for a private dinner on the first day in the White House. He was there through the official program, which was the 2nd day. On the 3rd day, he came for what was called a tech roundtable, which was out there. The First Lady, Jill Biden, she too had an event with the Prime Minister. event on a matter which was very dear to her heart, which was on skills and community colleges. There were 6 cabinet members who attended, Prime Minister's. I mean, even his with a mix of business leaders. You had the Secretary of State and the US Trade Representative out there. So one part of it was, the presence, the attention, the kind of a not just the administration. If you look today in a very polarized capital, we were made as welcome by the Republicans as by the Democrats. It was the Republican Speaker of the House who extended the invitation for the joint session of Congress. I mean, obviously with the Democrats also agreeing to it. And one constituency, which has historically been very skeptical about India was business. Because in all these visits I talked to you about, the 2005 visit, the 1980, business has always held back in America where India was concerned. This time, you had from, Tim Cook to Elon Musk to Satya Nadella to Sundar Pichai. I mean, to the Boeing guy, to the GE guy. I mean, you look actually at the levels and seriousness of the business interaction. Not just at the interaction, look at the outcomes which have come out of it. An agreement on jet engine is something which is technology is held perhaps even closer than nuclear technology. It's very, very rare for a country to actually have an understanding to share jet engine technology. Similarly, if you look at the outcomes even on semiconductors, and you all understand today the importance of semiconductors, it is really the key metric on how to compete today. Had a whole series of agreements from Micron to Lam Research, which to apply done deals. These are done deals with funds committed, locations made, ready to go, which you will see coming up in the next few months. If Google can actually say that, okay, we are moving our global fintech center to give. So, if you look at the administration, the Congress, the business, and the diaspora, of course, I don't even have to say, this time, remember, I mean, we've had rallies in the past where we invited people to come. This time, 8,000 people on their own for the White House opening ceremony. So I would say yes, absolutely. In fact, I was totting up because, ultimately it's come home to roost, where, listing out because I had to brief the how many things we had to do. There are actually 58 things I need to do as a follow-up to I actually believe in many ways, I use the word not related. I think today much more collaborative, mutual interest driven, I would say, way by which we have decided to go forward.
I think this indefatigable energy you have listing out these items, I think he's agreed to a lot.
24 ঘন্টা।
Good evening, Dr. Jaishankar. My question is, as far as this subcontinent is concerned, our relationship with our neighbor Bangladesh is very important, and we've been so far maintaining a very good relationship with Sheikh Hasina government. But for the last 1 decade or so, there is a big but, and that is that for our bilateral relationship, and their election is due this year.
Good evening, sir. I have two questions. One is the India recently buy some drones from US, but sir, this is important.
Not doing a press conference. I mean, I would prefer that you please keep your questions to what I spoke about.
Thank you so much. Last one, next.
Sir, in the context of Shyama Prasad Mukherjee's contribution, I want to mention that in 1947, 30% from Congress and 28 MLAs from Muslim League, 60 MLAs in Sindhu. JB, why not they East Province, East Hindu Province in India. The contribution of that somebody says that 58 MLA of East West Bengal, who voted for West Bengal, they are the, what is the contribution? Question is Sindhi in Hindu Sindhi in Pakistan. What are their protection? What are our foreign policy in that? Also in also in also East Bengal, there are 20%. 1970 they are also right. So what is our foreign policy? That is also a soft policy.
Last question.
Dr. Jaishankar, this is Srimoy Talukdar from First Post. I have a question for you on the visit, the Modi state visit. Since you talked about the importance of shaping narratives, would you agree these narratives agenda-driven comment of the outcomes of the PM state visit? And would you agree that India needs to intensify its lobbying efforts in the US? There is the shocking lack of knowledge in some constituencies in the US about India's diversity. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. I think again the wrong. We are not the central government party which has issues. But you still to ask. I could try to get the drones question asked. I only has already made regarding your question. The minority situation in Pakistan then after. That is really the core Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee's concerns were. Not just at that part. And, when we treatment, at the end of the day, statistics speak for. So when you look at your security, etc., I think we have actually good record, and that is exactly the point I was making, which is that, we should actually be, frankly, be proud of our record. And it is, who should be subjected, now, what could have happened, those foreign policy cannot go back to the past and say, many people But as how the situation in Jammu and Kashmir evolved, we took certain lessons and finally came to certain conclusions. So today, I think from all that has happened in the Indian subcontinent in the last 75 years, there are very important lessons for all of us to draw, certainly for the Indian government to draw, for the Indian public to draw. And it is important that we make the right choices because after all, in a democracy, every few years we renew our choices and ultimately it is our choices which shape our destiny. So that is really, the exercise in which we should be at. And finally, that last question. Look, I don't think there is lack of information which gets people to make comments. I think most people who make comments make it with some kind of agenda or some kind of mindset or some kind of purpose. It is not, I don't believe it is ignorance driven and therefore we need to lobby. There are people, see what has happened in a globalized world is very often the debates and divisions within our country. They feed into or are fed by debates and divisions outside our country. Now, it's obviously I think anybody who is remotely nationalistic will say, well, we should be running our own house with our own debates. Fine, people may have opinions about us, but ultimately it's our business. Now, obviously, there are people who have a different view of how our life should be run. And many of them encourage not just articulation of opinions, but for those opinions in some way to actually interpose itself into our political life. So I think today those are also issues, when we actually discuss politics, when we discuss what is right, what is wrong, what is correct, how should we actually exercise our democratic choices? Because there is a big exercise in influence, narrative shaping. I mean, if you look at this whole set of how these indices, every few months somebody will bring out some index, somebody will give some name, some adjective. What do you think it is? It is politics through other means. So we need to call it out. I don't think it's an issue of informing. I think it is a question of saying, look, hey guys, I know exactly what you are doing and I'm prepared to call you out. And that's really what we should do.
Well, I think I speak for everyone when I say that Dr. Jaishankar truly deserves the label of being a superstar foreign minister which we've had in India. Person who I think everybody admires, respects, and looks up to. I thank you very much for coming to Kolkata, your second visit. Let's hope this is the beginning of a wonderful friendship, to quote the last lines of Casablanca.
Hey, bhai, boss. Arey, boss na bhai,
Thank you so much.
দাদা বসুন না।
অনুরোধ করবো আসন গ্রহণ করার জন্য। আর একটু ছোট্ট সমাপ্তি অনুষ্ঠান রয়েছে, প্লিজ। এতক্ষণ আপনারা সবাই যেভাবে অংশগ্রহণ করেছেন তাতে আমরা অভিভূত, আনন্দিত। ধন্যবাদ জানানোর কোনো পরিভাষা নেই। আপনাদের সবাইকে ধন্যবাদ এবং সবথেকে বেশি করে ধন্যবাদ। হ্যাঁ, আমি অনুরোধ করব উজান মুখার্জিকে, তার সহযোগী সৌম্যজিৎ সরকার এবং সম্রাট দাস, তাদের নিয়ে।
आपको सुना गया। नंबर एक, समाज के अंदर, आपके समाज के अंदर क्या सॉल्यूशन देने की कोशिश की गई, या उन्होंने भी आपके हस्बैंड का ही साथ दिया, या फिर आप कह लीजिए जो कुरीतियां, जो चीजें उन्हीं का साथ दिया, या आपकी हेल्प की गई? क्योंकि बार बार कहा जाता है इंटरफेयर मत करिए, हमारे लॉज है।
अमन, टिल डेट 1 साल हो गया, 1 साल से भी ज्यादा हो गया। जून में आ गया था मुझे तीसरा लेटर। मुस्लिम पर्सनल लॉ बोर्ड जो है वो सुप्रीम कोर्ट में डे 1 मेरी पहली पिटीशन 3 मई को दाखिल हुई थी, उस दिन से लेकर आज दिन तक मेरे अगेंस्ट खड़ा है, विरोध कर रहा है मेरा मुस्लिम पर्सनल लॉ बोर्ड, जबकि सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने उनको बुलाया भी नहीं था। वो मतलब इनवाइट भी नहीं थे, फिर भी आकर मुस्लिम पर्सनल लॉ बोर्ड की तरफ से एक वकील नहीं खड़ा होता, 2 खड़े नहीं होते, 3 नहीं खड़े होते, 10-10 12 वकील खड़े होते हैं मेरे विरोध में।
मुस्लिम पर्सनल लॉ बोर्ड की
मैं अकेली होती हूँ, मैं सिर्फ अकेली होती हूँ और वहां पूरा एक कुनबा खड़ा होता है मुस्लिम
उनको क्या इंटरेस्ट है आपके केस में इतना?
ताकि
आप एक एग्जांपल ना मुस्लिम भी जो के लिए जागरूक ना हो जाए।
जिस तरीके से तलाक बिद्दत बैन हुआ था, तो कहीं ऐसा ना हो कि तलाक हसन एहसन भी बैन हो जाए और हम लोगों की दुकानें बंद।
भाई देखिए, ऐसा है कि शायद बेनजीर मुस्लिम बेटियों के लिए एक नजीर ना बन जाए ना, शायद इसी का सबसे ज्यादा खतरा होगा। रंगरेज भाई एक मिनट रंगरेज भाई, फिर मैं आपका अश्विनी जा रहा हूँ। आप बेनजीर के साथ हैं, ऑब्वियसली आप भी चाहते बच्ची को इंसाफ मिले, तो ये मुस्लिम पर्सनल लॉ बोर्ड क्यों नहीं चाहता है कि मुस्लिम बेटियां सशक्त हों, मुस्लिम बेटियों के पास राइट्स हों, वो मौलानाओं पर डिपेंड ना हो, सीधा जो है कानूनी लड़ाई लड़े? मैरिटल लॉज हैं, उसमें अगर इस तरह का उत्पीड़न हो रहा है तो क्या हो जाएगा अगर उनको लीगल राइट्स मिल जाएंगे? तो
सर तलाक के अंदर जो है मुस्लिम पर्सनल लॉ बोर्ड कोई भी आपत्ति नहीं जताती, वो मियाँ और बीबी का जो मसला होता है वो होता है, और वो कोर्ट जाती हैं या आपस में सेटलमेंट कर लेती हैं अपनी बात का। दूसरा, ये बार बार कह रही थी कि मेरे शोहर जो है मुझे छोड़ के चले गए। सर मैं बताता हूँ,
मुझे नहीं पता
जब
क्या होता है
फैमिली
जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल आपने कहा सेटलमेंट, आपस में सेटल हो जाता है
सर, सुनिए,
और नहीं हो रहा होगा तो
कोर्ट जाइए आप।
तो वो तो कोर्ट में तो मुस्लिम पर्सनल लॉ बोर्ड खड़ा हुआ है बच्ची के खिलाफ।
कानून नहीं है सर, ट्रिपल तलाक का कानून क्या है सर? क्या है वो कानून?
देश में कोर्ट बने तो अलग से कोर्ट बनाने की
कोई
क्या है?
किसी को तलाक देता है,
इस्लाम कोर्ट की जरूरत ही नहीं है।
जेल में रहना पड़ेगा और उसको जो है मुआवजा भी देना पड़ेगा, उसका रख रखाव का भी खर्चा उठाना पड़ेगा। मगर ये जो बार बार कह रही हैं कि मेरे पति जो चले गए मेरे सामने नहीं आए, जब दो फैमिली
एक सवाल मेरे को ना जानना है,
मेरी बात सुनिए, जब
हो
दो
सकता है मैं गलत हूँ, हो सकता है मैं गलत हूँ, रंगेश जो मुझे समझा रहे मुझे नहीं पता था कि क्या ये जो मैरिटल इश्यूज होते हैं, एक मिनट आप ही के पास आ रहा हूँ, मैं समझना चाह रहा हूँ, हो सकता है मैं गलत हूँ, बेनजीर और अश्विनी जी, ये जो मैरिटल इश्यूज होते हैं उसमें जो सेपरेशन का या जो आपके जो इंटरनल इश्यूज होते हैं, क्या वो मुस्लिम पर्सनल लॉ के हिसाब से सेटल होते हैं या मौजूदा सिस्टम में भी उसको आईपीसी के सेक्शंस उस पे लगते हैं?
मैं आपको बता रहा हूं, मुस्लिम पर्सनल लॉ बोर्ड ने क्या पूरे भारत में जगह जगह दारुल कज़ा बना दिया है। दारुल कज़ा का मतलब शरिया कोर्ट। इन्होंने हर थाने के आसपास हर 10 किलोमीटर के बाद एक मौलवी को उसको काजी बना रखा है, दारुल कज़ा बना। प्लीज सुन लीजिए प्लीज। अरे पीआईएल चल रही है यार, सुप्रीम कोर्ट में चल रही, सुन लो ना, सुन लो शांत सुन लो।
अरे आप पूछिएगा ना रंगेश भाई, पूछिएगा रंगेश भाई,
सुन तो लो पहले, सुन लो।
बोलिए ना रंगेश भाई, अब मैं आपके पास आऊंगा तब बोलिएगा ना।
आप पूरे दारुल कज़ा बना रखी हैं। कभी कोई बच्ची तो छोटी सी है, मान लो 10 साल की है, 12 साल की है, 14 साल की है, उसके अगर पिता जाते भी हैं तो क्या कहते हैं, एक काम करो, कहीं बाहर कोर्ट में नहीं जाना, तुम दारुल कज़ा में जाओ। और ये एग्जांपल मैं दे रहा हूं कलबुर्गी की डॉक्टर सईदा अमरीन की, एमबीबीएस एमएस गायनोलॉजिस्ट, उसके पिता को फोर्स किया कि कोर्ट मत जाओ, तुम दारुल कज़ा जाओ।
ना जाओ से ज्यादा मैं जानना चाह रहा हूं क्या वो नहीं जा सकती?
आज की डेट में कहा, अरे भाई डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस एक्ट लगेगा नहीं, बाल विवाह का एक्ट लगेगा नहीं, बलात्कार का कानून लगेगा नहीं, क्योंकि 1937 का शरिया एक्ट कह रहा है कि नहीं इसको छूट मिली हुई है।
वो पर्सनल लॉ है।
बहुविवाह का भाई एक बार सुनिए,
मैं यही मैं जानना चाह रहा था। वो बार बार कह रहे थे कि कोर्ट जाओ। अश्विनी जी बता रहे कि जो मैरिटल इश्यूज होंगे,
फैमिली इश्यूज है, जो फैमिली
वो सिविल है,
वो सिविल इशू है। और उस सिविल इशू में अंग्रेजों ने जो 1937 में कानून बनाया, जो एग्जिस्ट कर रहा है, वो कह रहा है कि इनको छूट है अपने तरीके से करने की।
तो ये भी समझ नहीं आता, मतलब यूसीसी नहीं चाहिए लेकिन आईपीसी चाहिए
इनको। मैं कह रहा हूं, वैसे तो ब्याज लेना हराम है, 20 करोड़ मुस्लिम्स के बैंक सुन तो लो,
नहीं लेते।
अरे सुन लो भैया,
गुरुजी
बीच में इंटरफेयर मत करना।
अमन जी मेरे पास में ये रहते हैं, एक शख्स बता दीजिए जो ब्याज लेता हो।
मैं बता
अच्छा
एक बता रहा था अभी, हमारी जो बहन ये कह रही, जब दो
मैंने एक मिनट पहले
पूरा
आपको यूसीसी नहीं चाहिए?
नहीं चाहिए, मैं
आईपीसी क्यों चाहिए?
आईपीसी, अरे हमारे देश का संविधान है।
फिर आप उस हिसाब से चलिए के हिसाब से
आ ही नहीं सकता सर।
मैं वही कह रहा हूं सर, आप पिक एंड चूज नहीं,
आदिवासी से लेकर समाज कुछ लोग हिंदू धर्म के ठेकेदार बने बैठे हैं, धर्म के ठेकेदार बने बैठे हैं, उनके वजह नहीं
लड़िए नहीं ना आपस।
भारत देश के नागरिकों के खिलाफ है सर।
अच्छा,
धार्मिक आजादी को रोक करिए।
अच्छा कैसे? अभी तो आया नहीं है
इस्लाम।
एक मिनट सर, अभी तो आया ही नहीं है
सर। जो एग्जाम्पल है,
अभी तो आया ही नहीं है।
वहाँ पर क्या हो रहा है सर गोवा में? सब
क्यों
हमारे
डरा रहे
एग्जाम्पल
हैं?
देख लीजिए,
वो अभी
अगर लड़का नहीं होता
प्रधानमंत्री ने भी कहा कि भड़काने वाली दुकानें खुल जाएंगी, भड़काए भाईजान क्यों बन रहे हैं? चलिए
तो
अब
सर ये लागू होगा ना, तो
सब पर
इनमें
लागू
दो
होगा।
शादियां हो जाएंगी।
नहीं होगी ना सर, सब पर लागू होगा ना फिर, सब पर लागू होगा ना फिर, गलत है।
वो यूसीसी नहीं है,
यूसीसी तो आया ही नहीं है अभी।
अरे सर वहाँ पर तो लागू है ना
एक
गोवा
मिनट,
में,
एक मिनट।
वहाँ पर तो लड़कियों का शोषण नहीं होगा क्या?
हाँ रंगरेज भाई, ये आपका एग्जांपल है, मैं भी
बात
सवाल
ही नहीं
पूछ-
समझना
नहीं,
चाहते
नहीं, बात समझना चाह रहा हूँ।
बात नहीं समझना चाहते।
मैं तो कह रहा हूँ वो गलत
कह
है,
रहा हूँ आप सुन ही नहीं रहे मेरी
मैं
बात।
कह रहा हूँ वो गलत
मैं
है।
कह रहा हूँ जब इनकी शादी हुई थी, इनके परिवार वालों ने रिश्ता किया था, इन्होंने खुद शादी की थी, पूछिए इनसे। तो इनके परिवार वाले डिसाइड करेंगे, दोनों पक्ष पार्टियां बैठती हैं, अगर वो नहीं मामला सुलझता तो फिर कोर्ट का रास्ता है, कोर्ट जाइए अपने मेंटेनेंस के लिए, कोर्ट का रास्ता है, पूछ लीजिए आप वकील
अच्छा
साहब
मैं
से।
पूछ रहा हूँ,
अगर
ये पूछ
झूठ
रहा हूँ,
बोलने लगे
मैं
तो वो
पूछ रहा हूँ,
बात
अब आप
अलग है।
शांत रहिए, मैं पूछ रहा हूँ।
1000
ये
केसेस हैं, मैं आपको बता सकता
चलिए
हूँ,
आप
कोर्ट में चल रहे हैं।
ये मैं यही इसी
maintenance
सवाल
के।
पर आ रहा था कि क्या कोर्ट का रास्ता ओपन होता है इन केसेस में, अगर समाज में
मैं
solution
जवाब
नहीं
दे रहा
हुआ?
हूँ।
हाँ,
पहले तो आप पाखंड समझिए। भारत में 20 करोड़ मुस्लिम बहन बेटियों का खाता है, सेविंग बैंक अकाउंट है, जनधन अकाउंट है, किसान सम्मान निधि भी आ रही है, प्रदेश सरकारों की भी योजनाएं आ रही हैं। मुफ्तखोरी तो हराम है, मुफ्त की योजनाएं हैं, मुफ्त आयुष्मान कार्ड है, मुफ्त का रोटी है, मुफ्त कपड़ा है, मुफ्त मकान है, प्रधानमंत्री आवास योजना है, कम से कम 300 योजनाएं चल रही हैं। मुफ्त में दवा लेना हराम है।
ज्यादातर योजनाओं के बेनिफिशियरीज
मुस्लिम 35%,
35%, 30%।
मुफ्त में दवा लेना हराम है।
प्रधानमंत्री आवास योजना, जनधन
एक बार मुफ्त में दवा लेना हराम है, आयुष्मान कार्ड सबसे ज्यादा बना हुआ है। ठीक है, अब दूसरे आ जाओ। क्या श्रद्धा को जिसने मारा, इस्लाम क्या कहता है कि जैसे अपराध हो उसी तरीके से हत्या, वैसे सजा मिलनी चाहिए। अगर क्या यहाँ बिजली चोरी करने वाले को करंट दे के मार सकते हैं? क्या श्रद्धा के हत्यारों को?
तो आईपीसी है ना फिर।
नहीं, वहां